one of the things I have discovered doing this, it is very rewarding. I have gained an education in something I thought I knew about, but actually didn't.
You're listening to the Stories Behind the Stars podcast. My name is Tatiana Fallon, and I'm your host. This podcast is run by the organization Stories Behind the Stars. This has nothing to do with Hollywood. We are telling the stories behind the stars that were given in World War II. For those of you who are not familiar, during World War II, when a service member was killed, the family received a banner with a gold star on it. We are telling the stories behind these stars. Our goal is to put them all 400,000 into a common database, which then we will build a smartphone app that will be searchable from any location where you can read the story behind the star and you can really come to know the individual that died on D-Day and fought for our freedoms. This podcast is dedicated to telling those stories as we find them, as our researchers are doing this amazing research. You'll hear from researchers who are all volunteers from all across the country, and you'll hear their story, what brought them to the project, and then also the stories that they're finding. This is amazing content, and I really hope you enjoy this adventure. This is part 2 of my interview with researcher and volunteer Steve Booth.
If you've got time, I'll give you one more.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Doing the Pearl Harbor project, I was mostly doing Army, and the Navy does things much different than the Army does, and so it took me a few tries to catch up with what's going on, and I found different resource centers that I could use. So I was poring over one that had all of the sailors that were lost in and around Pearl Harbor in that area and were buried in Honolulu. And they had a list of all their names. And I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden I see my namesake. Sailor by the name of Robert Sinclair Booth, Jr. Born in North Carolina, his father worked in government. They ended up moving to Washington, D.C., where he grew up. In high school, Robert said he wanted to be an electrical engineer. Enlisted in the Navy Reserve in 1940. And then in July of 1940, a month later, he received an honorable discharge from the Naval Reserve and was appointed a midshipman he was sent to Officer Candidate School. And so when he graduated from that, he went from enlisted to a major, they call it an ensign. It's the same thing as the first lieutenant. So that's what he did. And then he went into engineering. So he became part of the engineering crew on the USS Arizona. He was on the Arizona the morning of December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked and went down with the ship. It was lost when the Arizona went down. I don't think that they have yet identified his remains yet, but they have a major project going on to identify these guys that went down on the Arizona and the Oklahoma and all that. But the interesting thing about this is that after he died in December of 1941, the United States Navy decided to name a ship in his honor and asked his mother to be the sponsor, which is heavy duty with the Navy. I mean, the sponsors of ships are pretty much renowned, and it's only women that can be the sponsors. So in 1943, January of 1943, they started the process of building a ship that they named the USS Booth. and his mother was there when it was commissioned in September of 1943. She broke the champagne bottle on the hull, and away it went. And it went out and supported the war effort. And afterwards, when the war ended, the Army sold the ship to another country, and they renamed it. So we've got a ship.
Do you know what kind of ship it was? Was it just?
I have it. Let me find. Yeah, I've got
a transport or a tanker, or?
It wasn't a destroyer. A Cannon-class destroyer escort. So it was an escort for the destroyers, the gunships. Provided escort service to submarines and air attack for Navy vessels.
Wow.
Yeah, it was built in Norfolk, Virginia. Shipped to Cape Cod, where they completed it and then commissioned it there.
So are you related to him at all, or just have the same last name?
Shirt tail relative, yes. Yeah, and again, I just happened to be looking for something else and happened to see his name. And I did some research. His father and my father and my uncle are all traced back in their genealogy to Junius Brutus Booth, who was John Wilkes Booth's father.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're related back that far.
Well, it looks like the Booths have changed the course of history lots of times then.
A little bit. My grandson, one of my grandsons did a project. You were talking about getting somebody, a veteran, to come and talk to your class. When he was in the fifth grade, the whole school, the whole fifth grade class had a project. Pick whatever you want to do. And so my grandson said he wanted to do his on D-Day. And I said, that's a pretty big project. That's the D-Day. You could spend years doing that. And so he said, what should I do? And I said, let me have you talk to my uncle. And so my uncle got together with my grandson, and they decided to do his project on a beach called Slapton Sands. The beach was an English beach, but it was in geography, it was as close to Omaha and Utah Beach as they could get. And so the 743rd was practicing the landing. And so they sent these GIs out in the middle of the night into the water, and they had the flotation devices that they had were around the middle. It was kind of like a donut around the middle. And what happened was when they went into the water, they had a pack on their back. And so it immediately flipped them upside down. And because it was dark, nobody could see it. And so the next morning, when the sun came up, they had 300 or so soldiers upside down in the water. And so they had to hurry and replace them. They had to hurry replacements in. So the 743rd got a pretty good influx of new recruits. And those were actually the guys that went in on D-Day. They finished their training in a different way, but they joined up and away they went. The interesting thing about this is my grandson decided that, like I say, he said that's a good idea. And so my uncle told him, he said, because he found out that they all were going to present to the entire school. They were going to have one day where they put them in an auditorium and they had booths and they had to have displays and all kinds of stuff. And so my uncle volunteered to go with him. and talk to the parents and whoever came in. And so I picked my uncle up. My uncle was awarded the Silver Star while he was in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. And so I got his Silver Star out and all kinds of memorabilia from his service. And so we added that to my grandson's table, and the people were just flocking around him. I mean, it was really wonderful.
That's so cool. It's sad though, because they're all dying. That generation is dying, and there's so few of them left.
They are. Yeah, in fact, about a year ago, we lost the last tank commander that was involved in the liberation of the train in Magdeburg. So those guys are all gone. There's an author you might be interested in, or somebody else might be interested in. There's an author by the name of Matthew Roselle. He was a history teacher in Hudson Falls, New York. And one of the tank commanders, his name was Harold Walsh, but he went by Red. They gave him the nickname Red because he had red hair. But he and George Gross, who were the tank commanders that found those guys, Walsh's daughter lived in Hudson Falls. And her husband knew that Matt Roselle was interested, World War II buff and the whole bit. And he told him one day, he said, my father-in-law had moved from that area to Florida, but he's coming back to spend the summer with us. Would you like to be able to sit down and speak with him? And Roselle jumped at the chance. And so he took a camera with him and the whole bit and recorded for a little over 2 hours. I watched the interview. And Walsh was quite a guy. When he came back he was in law school before he went into service. And when he was discharged, he came back, and he and another guy, before they went into service, they sat for the bar exam, and they passed it. So when the two of them came back, they found out that they didn't have enough credits to graduate from law school. So they had to go back for one more semester, and then they graduated. So Walsh went into a career as a lawyer, and then he became a circuit court judge in the Albany area, and he also sat part-time on the New York Supreme Court. Quite a jester, quite a joker. He and Gross were just really good buddies, but to get his goat, Walsh would tell new recruits, they'd go up to him and say, hey, did you know this Gross guy was a boxer? And they really, and he says, yeah, he's a championship boxer. And he did, he was a boxer, but Walsh was getting after him. He says, yeah, he's a championship boxer. He could box more oranges in California than anybody. And Gross would go after him for that. But so in the interview, it's like I say, it was over 2 hours. And finally, when they looked like they were getting done, Walsh's daughter walks in the room. And you can hear her. She says, Dad, did you tell him about the train? And Walsh says, oh, I forgot all about that. So he started telling Roselle the story of the train near Magdeburg. And Roselle, being a history teacher, and he's also an author, decided that he was going to do some research. So he did some research for about 6 years. And he finally wrote a book that's called A Train Near Magdeburg, that has the stories that are the pictures that George Gross took and the one that Major Benjamin took. And so those are all, that's why they're included in that website. But the book is an absolutely riveting story of how these guys found that train and what they did to help save these people. They sent tankers into the local towns in the area and ordered the German farmers to stay up all night long so they could get some food back to those people on the train. And then they picked up the people from the train and they took them back into the cities and they said, you are going to take care of these people until somebody can come and get them. And then Walsh organized, because he ran into one of the survivors from the train. She contacted him in, I think, the late 90s, because he had gotten pretty famous with this book that he was researching. He organized a reunion between the survivors that could make it from the train and the soldiers that rescued them. And they did it at his high school in New York.
Wow.
So he brought them back together.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I posted my uncle's notes on, there's a 743rd Tank Battalion group on Facebook, and I posted my uncle's notes just for giggles. And like an hour after I posted it, Roselle sent me an email and said, I want to talk to you. And so we've been keeping up ever since.
Wow. So I always like to ask people, why do you do this, and has it changed you at all, or your perspective on life, or who you are as an individual, like doing these stories?
Absolutely, no question about it. I was always in awe of the fact that my uncle served in World War II and was in the tank battalion. And some of the stories he told were absolutely fascinating. And then when I started doing this, like I say, he kind of touched all of the safe areas. And now doing this research, I'm finding out how horrible it was for those guys. There was a period of time when they were going into Belgium during the Ardennes campaign, which is the Battle of the Bulge. They were pinned down and buttoned up in their tank for 12 straight days because they were under fire, and everybody was in a tank, and that's where they were for 12 days. He told me another interesting story. It was around Christmas time. They were surrounded by German forces and German tanks in a town in Belgium called Stavelot. And the Allies took refuge in a hotel there. And he said in that hotel, he met a tank destroyer commander. They go out and destroy tanks. And he said the guy was kind of a braggart and, a hotshot and that kind of a thing. And so he was telling him about finding a group of 7 or 8 German tanks crossing a bridge. And so he said, what we did was we hit the first tank and disabled it. We hit the last tank and disabled that one, and all of the rest of them were sitting ducks. And a little while later in the conversation, the guy said, I'm an author. I write books. Have you ever heard of me? And my uncle said no. And now I'm having a senior moment. Guy that writes cowboy stories.
Only one I know is Louis L'Amour, but
That's the one.
What?
He said, I'm Louis L'Amour. Have you ever heard of me? And my uncle says, no. And he said, today I wished I'd have got his autograph.
What?
That's who it was.
I love Louis L'Amour books. I've read so many of those.
Yeah. Yeah. These two guys were sitting with the rest of their troops, but sitting in the basement of a hotel with no place to go and just telling stories back and forth. He said that another interesting part about that same thing was the proprietor of the hotel, or at least the person that was running it, probably the daughter of the owners, was down there with them. And she had a young Belgian man with her, and he was getting pretty drunk. and started. He wanted to go out into the street and take care of the Germans. And the Allies said, no, you're not going to do that. You can't do that. No, he said, I'm going out. So finally they grabbed him and they tied him to a chair. And about every 30 minutes, they'd give him another drink just to keep him there. So they managed to get out of there okay. About 10 years before my uncle passed away, no, it was probably 15 years before my uncle passed away, he and my aunt went to Lava Hot Springs in Idaho. And they were in a hotel. They were sitting waiting to go into the dining room. And he said, there was this older woman sitting next to me waiting to get a table. And she was knitting or crocheting and humming a song. And he said, that sounded really familiar. And so he started a conversation with her and said, are you French? And she said, no, I'm Belgian. And my uncle said, are you the young woman from the hotel in Stavelot? And she said, yes. She had married the fiancé, so now they were man and wife. But many years later, my uncle ran into that couple up in Lava Hot Springs in Idaho.
Wow,
amazing?
What are the odds? That's insane.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he said they reminisced for a while, and it was really fun.
That's so cool. Wow. So what advice would you have to anybody thinking about volunteering?
It's a good thing to do. Fortunately, I have a little bit of time on my hands, so I can do it. But the other thing I've learned from your dad is even if you do one a month, it helps us get along the way. I've probably done between 150 and 200 stories right now. That's because I've got a little more time on my hands. But it's one of the things I have discovered doing this. It is very rewarding. I have gained an education in something I thought I knew about, but actually didn't.
Well, it's been such a pleasure having you on today. I've learned so much. It's been just so insightful and inspiring. And I just want to say thank you for volunteering and taking your time to do this. It's amazing the work you've done so far.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us listening to these amazing stories of these fallen heroes. If this is content you want to keep hearing, please consider sharing this podcast with others. The more we grow our listening base, the more people we can reach, the more impact we can have, the more volunteers we can find, and the more stories that get told. So if you like this content and you're enjoying what you're hearing, please follow us and share and find us on any social media platform and follow us there. And then most importantly, check us out at storiesbehindthestars.org. Click the volunteer button and join the Star Corps. Thank you.